My Lords, I rise with the unusual luxury of 10 minutes speaking time, given we only have a dozen backbench speeches on this crucial issue of taxation. And I hope some of the peers in your Lordship's House who specialise in issues of poverty and inequality, indeed any issues at all, will in future be joining these debates. Taxation, or lack of it, shapes our societies. As the richly informative and powerful speech of the Noble Lord Seeker outlined, it's decades of decisions about taxation that have helped to give us our deeply unequal, poverty-stricken society. We've been taxing the poor and allowing large companies and rich individuals to get away without paying. Now, the Noble Lord Lee suggested that maybe your Lordship's House needs more experts in tax, finance and business, but this is a far broader issue that needs far broader input. I quote the American historian Albert Bushnell Hart: "Taxation is the price which civilised communities pay for the opportunity of remaining civilised." And it's very clear that out on the streets of London, there are now very strong and rich debates of how the people who benefit from the investments of this and previous generations in roads, in public buildings and electricity supplies, and the services we all pay for, schools, hospital and policing, how they make a fair contribution to the maintenance and restoration of our degraded physical and social infrastructure, the impacts of austerity that we see in potholed roads, closed libraries, inadequate social care provision. These are not technical issues, but at the very foundation of our society. And for noble lords who might worry about where they'll get sources of information, I would like to thank the Tax Justice UK for a very excellent briefing and for drawing attention to the work of the Women's Budget Group, which has identified how women, people on low incomes and BAME communities will benefit least from the tax breaks in this bill, while they'll also bear the chief brunt of the scheduled spending cuts. Now, it's been interesting that in our debate so far, one of the things that's come up again and again is the issue of the problems of failures of regulation, failures of culture in our financial sector. And the noble lords who are taking part in the Financial Services Bill might like to reflect on this. The noble Lord Bridges of Headingley, talked about the issue of umbrella companies, and this is somewhere where the UK is, I'm afraid, world-leading is entirely the wrong direction. The noble Lord Butler of Brockwell talked about the many-headed hydra of tax dodging schemes, as indeed did the noble Lord Seeker in great detail. The fact is, we have a too large financial sector which is milking not just the UK, but the entire world, and particularly the global south. The centre of global corruption, my lords, is on our doorstep. Now, these days we often find ourselves, it's been suggested we all live in social media bubbles. Well, I'd have to say in your Lordship's House right now, I rather feel like I'm in the vigorous Atlantic surf of strong disagreement on economic issues. And I would particularly disagree with the noble Lord Forsyth and the noble Lady Baroness Neville Rolfe about their entire economic commentary. I would say that the ways and means mechanism, the implementation of this, it having existed for many years, really shows how the rules of the games have changed, and the old economic approaches, which failed so disastrously and gave us the global financial crash, we're finally looking differently at how the economy works and what the economy is for. And the noble Lord Forsyth and many others said we need to get the economy going again, focusing on growth. Well, I would remind your Lordship's House, in the country that is the chair of COP26, that we can't have infinite growth on a finite planet. That's not politics, it's physics. And the noble Lady Baroness Rolfe recommended some reading to us. Well, I have some alternative reading to suggest. A book that I reviewed this week in the House magazine. Professor Tim Jackson, really quite a mainstream economist, I think I could say. His book, Post-Growth, I would suggest is well worth a read. And I would also pick up on the points of the noble Lord Billamoria, focusing on the importance, as he sees it, of giant multinational companies. Well, I would stress that 61% of the employment in the UK is in small and medium enterprises. And the government talks about levelling up. I'd rather talk about the spreading out of prosperity. And the foundation of prosperity for every community in this land needs to be built on strong local economies of small, independent enterprises, cooperatives, a different kind of economic model, a stable kind of economic model. So having set the scene, I turn to some details in the finance bill. It's interesting, I take the point that several noble lords have made about the thickness of the paperwork, but actually it's really a very modest bill when you look at the measures. It talks about tidying up some Northern Ireland and VAT Brexit issues, another reminder that Brexit is by no means done. There are some very modest measures that noble lords have referred to about plastics, about red diesel, about cycling. Very, very modest, again, for the chair of COP26 when you think about the need to act on the climate emergency. And we have an increase in stamp duty land tax for overseas purchasers of residential property in England and Northern Ireland, which, should your lordships take an imaginary scan of the boroughs around where we sit today, might perhaps be best described as shutting the stable door after the horse has bolted. Now, the headline measure is a super deduction for the largest companies, many of which have indeed done very well out of the great tragedy and suffering of a global pandemic. Now, this is estimated to be going to cost the Treasury £25 billion. That, my lords, would be a lot of social care, or indeed a large injection that our education sector so desperately needs. Now, the Office for Budget Responsibility said that $5 billion of the spending that would be covered by this will be spent on previously panned investments. The Times reported that tax advisors specialising in capital allowances have pointed out that jacuzzis are listed as one of investment that could receive 130% rebate. But I think perhaps we also need to think about what's not in this bill. It's interesting that despite widespread debate in society now, both in the bill and in the other place in the debate around it, there was no amendment put down about a wealth tax, no real discussion of it in the other place, despite that now being a major topic of discussion among even some quite mainstream economists and certainly among the public. Now, of course, there's a lot of discussion about the levels of corporate taxation, led not by the UK, but by Joe Biden's America. Now, when I asked the noble Lord the Minister about the US President's plans back on the 14th of April, he gave me an effective no-comment response when I asked what the UK stance would be. We have, however, I'm pleased to see, signed up to the US initiative. Now, the noble Lord, in his answer to my supplementary question then, said something I think very interesting. He said, "We have always been a government who want to reduce taxation wherever possible." Perhaps he might like to consider the words of the Chancellor in deciding to end the race to the bottom in corporation tax by increasing the headline rate to 25% in 2023, after Her Majesty's Treasury found that the cut in the headline rate since 2010 did not drive inward investment. To quote the Chancellor, they might not be the most effective way to drive capital investment up. Now, I would also refer to the comments of the noble Lord Bill Amoria to those statistics. He referred to inward investment. I would say that that inward investment very often has been the selling off of the family silver, whether it's our water companies or our publicly held land, or indeed the family beds when it comes to the selling off of our care homes to the hedge fund industry. Now, if we did have, let's say, a wealth tax, well, where might it go? Well, despite the government's talk of an end to austerity, we've got a £15 billion cut in annual government departmental spending planned. These are governments that are already cut to the bone and, of course, being hit by the huge continuing impacts of the pandemic. And there's some very useful information about who's paying and who's not. And I'd referred noble lords to a report from the Cage Institute at the University of Warwick. In 2015-16, The average rate of tax paid by people who had more than £1 million in taxable income, one in a quarter of them paid less than 30%. 1 in 10 paid just 11%, the same as a person earning £15,000 a year. This is a key issue, my lords. I come back to the inequality, the poverty in our society, the issues so well covered by the Noble Lord Seeker. We're talking about capital gains tax and an inequality in the way income is taxed. These issues are all missing from this bill. They will need to be confronted soon. Thank you, my lords.